안녕하세요. UK톡스 웨비나 시리즈의 네 번째 세션에 참석해 주셔서 감사합니다. 저는 주한영국문화원 교육사회실 소속 엄선현입니다. 팬데믹으로 인해 유학을 준비하던 분들의 학업 계획에 많은 변수가 생겼죠. 하지만 양질의 교육에 대한 열정은 좀처럼 꺼지지 않습니다. 여전히 미래에 대한 다양한 선택지를 원하는 분들을 위해서 저희가 영국 유학과 진로를 주제로 총 10개의 웨비나를 준비했습니다. 400명이 넘는 분들이 신청해 주신 만큼 유익한 시간이 되기를 바라며 네 번째 세션 시작하겠습니다. 이번 세션에서는 스포츠 경영 전공에 대하여 높은 경쟁력을 지닌 영국의 유수대학교 세 곳의 교수님, 교직원과 함께 포스트 코로나 시대 스포츠 산업의 위기와 기회에 대하여 이야기를 나누어 볼 건데요. 저희가 한 가지 사과 말씀 드릴 부분이 있습니다. 석진 교수님께서는 지금 기술적인 오류로 인해서 접속을 하지 못하셨어요. 저희가 라이브 이벤트를 시작하고 나면은 접속이 어렵기 때문에 저희가 약속드린 시간에 행사를 시작하기 위해서 석진 교수님 프레젠테이션은 오늘 딜리버리를 하지 못할 것 같습니다. 하지만 리버풀 존 무어스 대학교의 다른 교수님과 그리고 국제처 담당관 분이 지금 백스테이지에 함께 계세요. 그래서 리버풀 존 무어스 대학교에 대해서 궁금한 점을 채팅창에 질문하시면 그분들께서 최선을 다해서 답변을 주실 예정이고요. 그리고 또 오늘 주제인 포스트 코로나 시대 스포츠 산업의 위기와 기회에 대해서는 여기 계신 다른 두 분 연사들께서도 굉장히 잘 알고 있는 분야이시기 때문에 이따가 실시간 질의응답 시간에 이 두 분께서 충분히 답변을 해주실 수 있을 것 같습니다. 맨체스터메트로폴리탄대학교의 마우리치오 발렌티 교수님과 그리고 코번트리 대학교의 마크 피카르츠 홍보처장님께서 각각 15분씩 준비한 발표를 해주실 거고요. 그 전에 저희가 간단한 당부의 말씀 드리겠습니다. 본 세션은 영어로 약 1시간 동안 진행될 예정이고요. 아무래도 중간에 15분의 프레젠테이션이 빠진 관계로 조금 더 일찍 끝날 수도 있습니다. 연사분들이나 참여 대학에 대해 궁금한 점이 있다면 언제든지 채팅창에 질문해 주시고요. 지금 백스테이지에 대기 중인 다른 대학 담당관들도 함께 정성껏 답변 드리겠습니다. 채팅창은 컴퓨터로 접속하신 분들은 우측에서 확인하실 수 있고요. 모바일 기기로 접속하셨으면 상단에 물음표 아이콘 누르시면 됩니다. 채팅창에 다른 분들이 질문하신 것들 공감이 되거나 마음에 드신다면 좋아요 버튼 눌러주세요. 웨비나 종료 전에 약소하지만 저희가 마음을 담아 준비한 선물을 랜덤으로 한 분을 추첨하여 드릴 예정이니 끝까지 자리를 지켜주시면 매우 감사하겠습니다. 그럼 지금부터 시작하겠습니다. Hi speakers, thank you so much for waiting for our opening in Korean. So we are ready to start our first presentation. And to attendees, everyone, I'm honored to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Mauricio Valenti from the Metropolitan University. So he will talk about the COVID-19 impact on the sports industry. Dr. Mauricio?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present today on how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the sport business. My name is Mauricio Valenti. I'm a lecturer in sport management and leader of the undergraduate programs in sport business management and sport marketing management at Manchester Metropolitan University. In today's presentation, I'm going to touch upon the following elements. If we go on the next slide, please. Relating to the disruption to sport worldwide due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I'll present a brief analysis of the current problems for sport and how sport has been affected by the pandemic. And I will end this presentation providing you with some information about what Manchester as a city and Manchester Metropolitan University as an institution can offer if you're interested in studying and working in sports. Next slide, please. So when it comes to examining the disruption that COVID-19 has generated on the sport industry worldwide, the analysis cannot be done without taking into account the broad economic changes that COVID-19 has caused beyond sports, so to the economy as a whole. In particular, the mobility restrictions and the lockdown measures have resulted in reduced demand for products, goods and services, as we know. And these, of course, include products that relate to sport or that are utilized for practicing sport or practicing physical activity. The difficulties in the processes of production and the distribution have, of course, affected the transport and supply sides, which include those for sport-related goods. And it's also important to consider that the model of sport delivery and provision in Europe is, in many cases, dependent on funding from governmental bodies, from agencies. Therefore, during this period in which many national governments have decided to postpone deadlines for taxpayers, this also means that governments receive reduced tax intake, which ultimately might affect funding for sport organizations. So finally, the general fear for infection, the social distancing measures, the rules for quarantine have affected willingness of individuals to travel. And of course, these include also those who travel with intention to spend their holidays practicing sports disciplines. The disruption caused by COVID-19 has certainly affected the delivery of professional sports as well. And as we know, watching and following sport is one of society's most popular pastimes. However, actually spectating sport events at the stadiums in person represents an occasion for mass gathering, and therefore, under the current circumstances, this presents quite unique challenge to public health. So the COVID-19 pandemic has caused what can be considered the most significant disruption to worldwide sporting calendar since the Second World War. And this included events that, previous slide, These included events that were rescheduled. So I think about the Tokyo Olympics that was initially scheduled for 2020 and now taking place in 2021. Some events that had to be completely cancelled. Think about one of the most historic events in sports, such as Wimbledon, the famous tennis tournament that takes place in England every year, with the 2020 edition being completely cancelled. But also the pandemic has also caused a stop of leagues of competition with immediate effect for other competition to be redesigned in terms of their format to face emergency, such as the UEFA Champions League and the UEFA Women's Champions League in the past season. Next slide, please. And speaking of professional sports competition, it is obvious that most of the professional sports leagues and clubs run into financial problems without the possibility to accommodate spectators. So in fact, this is an issue especially for leagues that rely mainly on spectators to sustain their businesses. Another financial problem relates to the fact that organizations are unable to actually provide their services to citizens. So think about fitness clubs or those who pay a membership to join a gym, for example, those organizations that organize local tournaments, training camps. So of course, with the mobility restrictions, with the social distancing measures, it is extremely challenging to deliver such services. Also, a major problem is that most sport organizations often have fixed costs that they have to pay regardless of the loss of revenues. Therefore, they risk running into cash flow difficulties if they not have enough support or savings to cope with these costs. Next slide, please. So the European Union has actually tried to quantify the disruption caused by COVID on the sports sector. And the report produced by the EU estimated an economic impact between 45.5 and 56.9 billion euros in terms of sport-related GDP in the short term. Also, the impact that is predicted in terms of sport-related employment is estimated to hit almost 1 million individuals who work in the sport industry or in associated sectors. Next slide, please. So what these data mean for the sports sector in actual terms is that we expect a contraction in this sports sector. However, the contraction is expected to account for about 10 to 12% in terms of sport-specific GDP and employment, as we know the sport actually remains a very important sector of the economy, as it generates over 360 billion euros and employ almost 10 million people in Europe. So what is also important to take into account is that sport works in conjunction with other sectors of the economy, and therefore, while suffering in the short term from these broader economic changes due to the COVID pandemic, it can also actually help boost the recovery of other economic sectors as soon as these restart back to normal. Moving forward to the next slide, we can see that the sports sector will certainly face a difficult period, with many sport organizations and stakeholders having to restructure, to reorganize at least part of their operation and businesses. However, whether the effect of COVID-19 on the sport business will actually remain evident in the long term is an interesting point for debate. What is certain is that measures and packages are being put in place by government, by institutions, to compensate for the revenue losses and to sustain a quick recovery from the COVID crisis. Also, following a period of uncertainty and economic contractions, Direct support is being provided to sport workers and to athletes, as they are the ones most of the time lack protections from formal employment. Next slide, please. So we see that while the impacts of COVID on the sport industry has been considerable, the future actually holds some very exciting opportunities for the sport industry itself and for the professionals working in this sector. So we know that there are different dynamics on the policies and the steps that will be undertaken by the affected stakeholders to recover from this crisis. And this actually represents a great opportunity to reflect on the systemic issues that have affected the sport industry in the past 10 to 15 years. So the habits of sport participants, the habits of sport fans or spectators will likely present new challenges that we as academics, we as researchers, as part of the sport community, we need to unpick and address to help the industry recover from the crisis. And so new professions will be shaped as a result of sport moving towards an environment that potentially will be more digital oriented. Next slide, please. In this context, Manchester represents actually the hotbed to study this new phase for the sport industry. Manchester is the city of sport, with a number of sporting governing bodies and sporting venues based in Manchester. We also have two of the most important football clubs worldwide being in Manchester, Manchester United and Manchester City football clubs. Manchester is not just the city where sport is played, but also the city where sport is done in terms of marketing, communication, business more generally. And this makes Manchester Metropolitan University, the institution that I today represent, well placed to build industry links and offer a wide range of opportunities to the students that study with us. Next slide. You will see that there is a multitude of reasons to come and study sport business management or sport marketing management at Manchester Met. First of all, the degree courses are taught in our business school, which has achieved triple accreditations for high standards of excellence in teaching and research. The second reason is that we have a long-lasting tradition of preparing students in these fields, in these particular disciplines relating to sport management. The third reason is that at Manchester Metropolitan, we are privileged to have a world-class academic team with lecturers coming from different countries with different expertise. This allows us to support our students very strongly in their learning experience, while at the same time building a truly international environment. Fourth reason is that sport management courses at Manchester Met are tailored to meet the needs of the industry and make it as useful as possible for your career. And of course, throughout your course, you'll be able to put your hands on sport industry-led projects. For example, as part of the course, our students collaborate with Manchester City Football Club. We also organize a number of visits at venues such as the National Football Museum, the Manchester Aquatic Centre, and we often organize lectures delivered by guests coming from the industry to talk about their experiences and help our students, of course, broaden their network in the sport context. Next slide. Sport management courses at Manchester Met are not all sat in class. Instead, we offer what we call active learning. So we arrange visits to sport facilities, assessment through practical activities. And in regards to employability, over 3/4 of our students work in graduate roles or are in further study 6 months after graduation. And one of the elements that contribute to that number is certainly the events that we run with the career team. So we organize every year a career in sport event, inviting employers at the university. For the next slide, and I almost conclude the presentation, I want to show you Anshul, who is one of our student testimonials. Anshul is an international student who graduated in sport business management in the last academic year. He has taken the advantage of work experience, volunteering opportunities relevant to the degree, such as volunteering at the Cricket World Cup, at the World Taekwondo Championship. And I was lucky enough myself to supervise Anshul's final year dissertation, for which he did a fantastic job and his studies to end his studies at Manchester Met. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'll finish off with, I hope you enjoyed this talk. I'd be delighted, of course, to hear from you in case you got any questions. And please feel free to get in touch via email or post your questions in the chat. My colleague Charlotte and myself, we of course happily take these questions and address any queries that you might have. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Mauricio. I personally find it very insightful. So attendees, please ask any questions you are curious. So the university rep and other people at the backstage will help you to answer to your questions. And now we have our next speaker, Mark P.A. Cash from Coventry University. So he will talk about career prospects in the post-COVID-19 world. So let me hand over to him now. Mark?
Yeah, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, that's always need to check these things.
Right.
Okay, thank you for being given the opportunity to talk to all these potential applicants. Obviously, as you said, I'm going to focus on careers and employment opportunities in sport management post-COVID. So I'll actually build on some of the points that Mauricio gave. Some really useful statistics in Mauricio's presentation, which I think are sort of very relevant. If we move on to the next slide. In terms of myself, I've been teaching sport. I've worked in sport management and taught sport management for over 25 years. I'm the associate head of school for the School of Marketing and Management. So our sport management courses sit within our business school. And we've been running sport, leisure, tourism related courses for about 30 years. And one of the points which I really want to emphasize in today's talk is that sport is already making a comeback and it will continue to grow. And that's very important to think about in terms of careers and also in terms of deciding what courses you want to choose. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm focusing on careers, but it's really useful to have a look at some of these statistics. As I said, Mauricio gave some fabulous statistics which sort of portrayed the scale of the sport industry and also the impact. And when we're looking at these slides, the focus is on careers. So the illustration on the left, the global revenues, what that illustrates is the variety of jobs out there. So they're in manufacturing of sports goods and clothing. They're in the transport networks. They're in the gyms, the fitness facilities, the football clubs, the sports clubs, the arenas. So that's an important point just to emphasize. And the slide on the outside, the illustration on the right, the pandemic, where it says pandemic has cut global sport calendar, that dramatically shows the impact, the loss. And the danger is that students looking at this will look at the sport industry and the careers in the context of now. But one of the things which we need to emphasize is that that will change. Sport will come back. And some of the other illustrations that we have here is that COVID has a profound impact on the actual physical participation of sports. And we use this term grassroots. Grassroots means, you know, children playing in the park, whether it's football, baseball, doing fun runs. And COVID's had quite a profound impact, but it's important to appreciate the diversity of the sport industry. It can be done for commercial profit and we can focus on the big clubs, or there's numerous opportunities at the grassroots level, which is often done at a non-profit level. So if we could have the next slide, please. If we just move on. Now, those losses show something very important. They show the profound loss that is felt economically, which I think should be quite clear in terms of economic activity and jobs. But I think it also shows the impact socially. There's this term that we use, this collective effervescence. What that really means is that it's those moments of joy that we get when we watch and participate and share a sport moment. Diego Maradona recently died. You know, there's a discussion, was he the world's greatest footballer ever? Interesting discussion. But I put this photograph here because it's quite astonishing. It goes back to the 1980s, but when you look at that picture with Diego in the forefront, but look at the crowds. That is thousands of people in the city of Napoli sharing a moment. And those moments are so important to us. Now, we can often dismiss sport as being something frivolous, as unimportant. But what I would say to you is, think about the importance you place for sport in the context of the quality of your lives. And you realise it's actually important. We should not underestimate the importance of it in terms of our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and our social health. So something very important. And that's important to emphasise because it shows that these jobs are needed. They're needed, not just economically, but in terms of our well-being. Next slide, please. This is a theme that you'll often hear. So whenever we have a crisis, and COVID has been a profound crisis, it's cost billions to the sports economy around the world. But we often emphasise this point. And this is something that good business management, sport management courses will do, is to explain that with every crisis, there will be losers and there will be winners. There are dangers and there are opportunities. And when we look at this, we'll see that in some areas, new jobs have actually been created. So even though we saw those dramatic statistics in terms of the impacts, what we also know is that there's been sort of lots of winners. For example, cycling has become, certainly in the UK and in many European countries, there's been an upsurge in terms of cycling. Mauricio also mentioned about the importance of esports. That's been phenomenally important and something particularly important in terms of career, where career has a real competitive advantage because of sort of the infrastructure placed in terms of networks. So there's this idea of winners and losers, and certainly all the big sports clubs are putting an awful lot of investment in terms of leveraging their brands in terms of esports, and esports has been grown phenomenally, and there's some really interesting internships that have become available. If we have the next slide, please. So when you're looking at sport, we've seen that there's been a dramatic downturn. Hopefully you'll see that there are also opportunities, and you also see that sport is coming back. It's coming back slowly, where people are allowed to watch sports events. And the argument I've been making is that because sport is so important economically, socially, personally, these jobs will come back. And I'd strongly encourage you to look at a website like Global Sports, to look at the diversity of jobs. Now look at these jobs here. This is just one page, and these are jobs that have been advertised just in the past few days, and they show the diversity. So we've got head of business development for an organization, we've got spectator service information and communications manager, we've got jobs in safety, in risk management, we've got internships, so this is relevant for students who are looking for that work experience, and here it is for volleyball and basketball. We've got jobs in FIFA, ticketing infrastructure management. We've got transport systems. The point is, I could go on and on and on. There are so many more jobs. Students often come in thinking, I would like to be this, so a manager of a sport facility, or I'd like to be a sport agent. But one of the important things about sort of studying a degree is that it should open up your mind about the opportunities out there. And COVID is sort of removed some opportunities, but it's created many new ones. Next slide, please. So something which has always been emphasized. So there's a lot of pent-up demand, and as I mean, it's fantastic at the moment that we've got the vaccinations for COVID. It's going to take a while to work through sort of countries and through the world. You know, it's going to take sort of probably over a year, but things will start rebuilding. And there's an awful lot of opportunities, certainly in the UK. There's all sorts of interesting opportunities. Around the city of Coventry, we've got the Commonwealth Games will be taking place. There's all sorts of events that will be taking place. So some interesting opportunities for internships, and particularly in terms of volunteering. One of the things at Coventry that we're particularly proud of are the volunteering opportunities that we create for students to gain work experience. And Coventry is really well placed in terms of offering all these internships, whether it's for football, for rugby, for cricket, for netball. The list goes on and on and on. So there's an awful lot of events coming. If we have the next slide, please. So the important question is, you're interested in doing a sport management course, and a lot of people are saying, well, look at the impacts COVID had. Maybe this isn't the course for me. But I would say, should you do a sport course if you're interested? Yes, certainly at Coventry, one of our key selling points is that these are business management degrees that specialise in sport management, and you would develop a diverse range of skills that are very transferable. And when you're looking at sport management courses, and one of the reasons we're so confident in Coventry in terms of the quality of our courses is that I think you should actually look for the opportunities for work experience. And at Coventry, we excel at that. We're really proud of the opportunities that students have taken in terms of working for all sorts of different organisations. But also, when you're looking at course content, look at how they actually approach crisis. Do they actually say, oh, this is a problem? Or do they actually give you the skills to actually say, well, this is the crisis, let's deal with it. Let's go forward. Let's think about how we manage this situation creatively. So very important things to actually think about. If we go to the final slide. So, conclusion. Sport is already making a comeback, and that's important from the point of view of careers. So, yeah, some jobs will have gone, but the point is that with a crisis event on the scale of COVID, it shakes up systems and it creates and unleashes new opportunities. So the real winners certainly have been sports, esports. With our degrees, one of the things that we've paid particular attention to is the careers element. That we try and think very carefully how you develop your skills, knowledge, and your working cultures to deal with future crisis events, but also how you can actually sort of embed these in work experience. And the illustrations we have here is just some of the students who have worked on a variety of sport events. We constantly offer the opportunities for internships and for short-term work experience. So we have students working on the British basketball finals. We've got students working on the Cricket World Cup. We've had a number of students who have gained internships for at Tottenham in terms of partnerships. You know, the list can go on and on and on and on. And I'd strongly encourage you to have a look at some of the opportunities that we've created at Coventry, because when you leave a degree, when you complete your degree, you want to gain an academic qualification. You want to have gained work experience. You want to have developed your skills, and you want to have developed your network, your working network and your social network. And when you look at the mix of our students, they're highly diverse, coming from all over the world. And we've this year we've had 18 Korean students on our first year undergraduate course. So I'll finish there if there's any questions. So hopefully I've encouraged you to think more creatively and to be quite encouraged about the opportunities in sports going forward. So I'll leave it there. Is that all right? Am I up to time?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about your Stay in Touch page?
These are, it's really just for reference. So if you want to make a note of these, what you'll see is the activities that we do, particularly when we advertise work experience. We recently did a guest lecture week. So we have a week where we suspend studies and we bring practitioners in. We had 44 speakers, 22 of those were former alumni, and many of those would send through job opportunities working on different sports events and careers. And you can follow us on sort of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. They're specific to the sport and event management courses. So it gives you a nice insight about the rhythm of the year and all the opportunities we create, whether it's going on trips, bringing in industry speakers, saying there's an event that's taking place, gain some work experience, and so on. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. I think the attendees found it very helpful. And let's move to the Q&A session. So please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A chat box. And don't forget to give a thumbs up if you find the answers useful. So my first question is for Dr. Mauricio, because Dr. Mark already explained about the recovery of sports industry a little bit. So I'd like to hear Dr. Mauricio's perspective about the opportunities in sports industry in post-COVID-19 world.
Thank you for your question. Yes, absolutely. I think Mark has touched upon some of these elements with the sport industry becoming potentially more digital oriented. I have mentioned this briefly in my presentation as well, with the habits of sport participants, the habit of sport fans, and the habit of sport spectators, of course, having to change. And therefore, this implies that there will be different demands and different, of course, occasions to interact with consumers of sport and of sport industry, meaning that from a sport professional perspective, we might need to adapt to these circumstances. And certainly the sport industry, in particular the professional sport industry, has already implemented a number of changes within itself. Think about the professional football clubs in England as a great example of that. And I will certainly see more of these changes coming in. However, I think what Mark mentioned in terms of the recovery already happening to some extent, and with the sport business actually being affected by it, but potentially growing and even strongly from that, I believe that the opportunities will continue to be there, and potentially shifting a bit of the nature of what we can offer in terms of the sport professionals, but certainly in terms of numbers, in terms of quantity. There will be a contraction for probably the short term, but in the coming years, I wouldn't expect that massive change. Again, sport remains one of the most important pastimes for people. We all love watching sport and we all love participating in sport. So as I said, it could be that the nature of our professions will change or will need to adapt for the next maybe 6 months, 1 year, but on the long term, that certainly will be back to normal. I hope.
All right, thank you very much. We have another question to Mark, and the students say she or he checked your profile from the promotional material we provided before, and she know you taught business administration in tourism before. So she's interested to find your opinion about, the collaboration between the sports and tourism industries to continue after COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, tourism is an industry that's been profoundly hit by COVID, because the definition of tourism is, you know, it involves the transport, staying away from home for 24 hours, and usually some accommodation. And whenever, I mean, we were looking at all these huge global events that have had to be shifted. They are an integral part of the tourism industry, because if you think about it, you know, if you're having something like the Olympics, it involves the transport of thousands of people. Now, short term, that has been affected, but tourism is changing, and that's one of the interesting things. So tourism is another one of these benchmarks in terms of the quality of our lives. You know, sport sits within there. It can be part of the tourism industry, or it can be separate. So, you know, yesterday, you know, I had a game of football. Now, I'm not a tourist, but that's part of the sport industry. You hire a facility, you pay, you work, you meet up with your friends. But if I was to go to sort of watch a sport event and then I'm becoming a tourist. So that sector will come back, but there are going to be some changes. So there possibly will be stronger domestic sport tourism. So people travelling within the country. That's one of the pressures that's actually taken place. So people thinking, well, I might not be able to go over there, but if I stay here, there are all sorts of opportunities. So that's the way to see the world. It's always about sort of opportunities and threats. And I think one of the things that sort of Mauricio and myself are trying to emphasize is that sport, tourism, leisure, these are important benchmarks for the quality of our lives. And if we were to say no more leisure time, no more fun, you think, well, what's going to happen to that? And that importance, because we associate it with having fun, that should not mean it's not important. These are serious, huge global industries. And pre-pandemic, you know, by some counts, the tourism industry could be regarded as the biggest industry in the world. Depends how you take it, how you count it. You know, if you include accommodation, food, transport. So big answer to a simple question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insightful answer. So I'll move to another question. And I think you might need to talk about this. Maybe you have something to tell about this question. There are some athletes who were diagnosed of COVID already, and it does seem that there must be some damage to their capabilities even after full recovery. So do you think, is there anything to say in the perspective of sports business? So I want to hear both of the opinions, and maybe Mark, you go first.
I suppose we're moving into the area of sports science in terms of some of the physiological impacts, and I'm not necessarily qualified to talk about the physiological science, but I think putting the business management hat on, that is an important consideration, because clubs, the elite clubs with athletes, whether it's football players, baseball players, whatever, those are their assets, and they have to think very carefully about how they protect their assets. So if I was turning that question on a management perspective of how would you deal with it, you'd almost say from a health and safety perspective that they have to be protected. These are assets. Now, fortunately, if you're young, you know, you're less likely to have suffer the impacts. And you know, one thing that is beginning to emerge are things like long COVID. You know, the symptoms and the impacts can last for months. All we know is the months. We don't know if it goes on for longer. But fortunately, if you're young and healthy, you're less likely, it seems, to be impacted. But I would turn it from a management perspective and say, any club, any organisation has a duty of care to protect people. So that means protection, vaccinations, all of these elements will have to be built into the management framework of going forward of how we deal with it. So there's one possible perspective.
All right, thank you so much. So how do you think about this, Dr. Mauricio?
Thanks for your question. Yes, I certainly agree with what Mark said at the beginning of his answer, saying that I'm not a sport physiologist, so I wouldn't comment too much on the sport science aspects. But yeah, certainly I would, putting my sport business management hat on, as Mark mentioned. It is something that we need to consider in the long term. I think the level of uncertainty about this virus is still very high, despite, of course, the vaccine coming in and some measures being taken, of course, from a medical point of view, not just for sport, but for the population more generally. So definitely, it is something that we still don't know fully, or we don't fully understand how the long COVID might work and what implications this might have for athletes. In terms of business side and marketing side, certainly the fact that following a period of uncertainty and economic contraction, the governments are already providing sport workers, sport athletes, as these are normally the ones, especially athletes, that lack protections from formal employment. The packages of support, the measures that have been taken, even very recently in the last 2 days, I know that the European Union has reinstalled their budget for the Erasmus project, which includes many sport organizations and many projects relating to physical activity. And this, of course, includes athletes, different sports. Don't think about just the big bubble of professional football, because that's, of course, something that, in a way, can, at least at the very highest level, can save itself, given the high amount of revenues that they're able to generate from TV rights, from sales of broadcasting rights and all that. But more on the grassroots level, more on the athletes that play those that we call niche sports, those that are less popular sports, but probably commercial rights are not as developed. Certainly the intervention of governments will help compensate for those revenue losses. And it's our job as sport professionals, not necessarily athletes, because we might work with organizations, we might work with athletes, but we are not athletes ourselves. But it is our job to reflect on these issues, unpick the different challenges that we have, and then provide some solutions, or at least try and provide the stakeholders, the affected stakeholders, with some solution. And that's why it is key to study these problems with a special level of understanding about the sport industry itself, rather than general business management. Of course, applied to sport, it is a different matter, because you can unpick the challenges that are specifically related to the sport industry.
All right, thank you very much. There are many questions similar, so I want to make it into one, and I'm going to ask you this. As all the university reps already answered for this type of questions, like, you know, the internship opportunities and placement opportunities, and I know all three institutions provide such a good opportunities and in good collaboration and partnership with a very well-known sports club. So what they want to know, what Korean students want to know is, as an international students, if they want to be competitive for the position compared to, you know, competing with the local students, then what kind of specific or unique skills that they should have to be more competitive for the position? So maybe, yeah, Mark first.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. I always speak you first. Sorry.
Sorry. Well, that's all right. If you want to vary, I'll let Mauricio go first. Then I'll be.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, no problem. Thanks for that, Mark. Yeah, no, in terms of international students, I think you, I when I studied myself in a UK university, I was an international student myself. I'm originally from Italy. And therefore, when thinking about what university can give you in terms of competitive advantage, I would revert that question and think about what you actually are bringing to the university with your international background. So you are already in a position that is already stronger from the beginning, given that you can bring your abilities and bring in potentially a different culture, a different background to the university. And we definitely value that diversity. We definitely value the understanding from someone with a different background. And actually, again, as I said, reverting that point about what the university can give you, it's more about what also you can bring to the university in terms of your expertise, in terms of particular sector of sport that you might be interested in, particular sport that you might be interested in. So again, it is a more, if you think about the nature of giving and taking, rather than simply having that mentality of just the competitive advantage. I think it is a kind of two-way relationship in that case to answer that question.
All right. So maybe Mark, could you comment on this as well?
Yeah, we often use this. There's a common quote in sport. It's attributed to Gary Player, of golf, a very successful golf player many years ago. But many sport athletes and clubs have used it. But he used to say, sort of, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And the point about that is that when you do a degree, it's an investment. And one of the things that you must do is make the most of the opportunities that are created. And so I think Mauricio is absolutely right. When with international students, I think that already says something about your character in terms of the fact that you have got more drive to want to make a very courageous decision in many ways to study in another country. So I think, there's one box there already. And if you maintain that drive, then as the opportunities come up for internships, for gaining experience on a weekend event, make the most of it. There's the other attribute is that networking is so important, and because you'll be on a diverse course, develop your networks, and some of those will be developed and gained from work experience. And then we've got, there's opportunities for doing short courses at Coventry. We have advantage modules, so there's opportunities for additional languages, for developing skills in digital communications. There's a long list. So there's another dimension there. And obviously it's making the most of you all getting the best academic qualification. So that's how we often say, get your academic qualification, develop any further skills that you can, gain the work experience, develop your social networks, and you will develop a whole wide range of skills in terms of which you'll gain from any degree, in terms of team building, communication skills, time management, the list goes on. So but 5 key dimensions, but it's an investment. Make the most of it.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. I think we ran through all the questions because the university rep already replied in very detail to all the questions. So as we have a little bit more time because of the the vacancy of second presenter, so do you mind to say a few words to attendees about your institution briefly?
Yeah, okay. So it's like tennis at the moment, Mauricio. We're taking it in terms of serve first. So, at Coventry, I think we've been teaching sport management related courses, for over 30 years. And what that means is that we've got really deep and profound links with industry. And the statistic I mentioned earlier is that we're really proud of our guest lecture week, where we get practitioners coming in, and 22 of those were former students who are now working in industry, really diverse industries, and coming in to talk to students to share their experiences. And that says a lot about the importance that we've invested in terms of employability and the applied nature of our courses. And I always tell students, be happy with the course, You know, make sure you're happy with the course, do the research, be happy with the university, be happy with the city. Do the research, look at the benchmarks, where we compare. We're pretty confident, where we sit, but do the research, and I think you'll find that sort of Coventry will come out sort of very highly ranked. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. How about Manchester Metropolitan University?
Thanks for this question. Yeah, in terms of the sport management courses at Manchester Metropolitan, as we said earlier in the presentation, we always try and build that link directly with industry experts. In terms of the investment that the university is making into enhancing the facilities that we have and where we teach sport, actually in 2022, we will open our Institute of Sport that will collate all the expertise that we have from sport science, sport management, sport business, sport policy. I actually sit in the sport policy unit within the university, and we are, let's say, into a kind of cross junction of departments with economics and business, but also sport sciences. So in a way, Manchester Met is really looking towards building that strong expertise at national and international level to help the stakeholders building further opportunities for sport and of course grow the industry overall. So yeah, I think the key point, if I can highlight that, is the Institute of Sport, which we will build in 2022, that will further, let's say, our assets in terms of the facilities, but also in terms of expertise that we can bring in for the sport management courses.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mauricio. Although we don't have Dr. Jack here from Liverpool John Moore University, instead we have another professor, Trek. Trek was helping to answer the questions at the backstage. So maybe Trek could also answer for our last question, like if you want to say anything about your institution to today's attendees. Trek?
Yes. Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity at the end just to respond to that question, and thank you for the two presenters who presented. It was really interesting to listen to the presentations today. I think for Liverpool John Moores University, we are a sport business programme that has been running for 5 years, so we're quite new, but we come from a background of sport science, sport development and sport management, which has been embedded within our city for a number of years. And recently we've just moved to our business school, so similar to Coventry and Manchester, we sit within our business school. So we do have some quite exciting opportunities coming up now as we start to develop the programme and embed within the business aspects of the business school within Liverpool John Moores University. For us, from the sport business programme point of view, I would say we have employability and entrepreneurship embedded across the whole of our curriculum. So we offer placements, projects, and the one-year internship. And I think probably one of the unique things about our programme is the collaborative work we do, not only on placements with students and projects and case studies, but actually the way we integrate with the likes of Liverpool Football Club, our local rugby clubs. We obviously have them. We have them coming into the curriculum on a regular basis, and obviously speaking to the students. But one of the things that we set up a couple of years ago, we have an employability advisory group. So we have over 20 employers, as I say, from football to rugby to local authority, health and fitness clubs, who embed their experiences into our curriculum, but also inform the way we deliver and develop our curriculum for the future. So I think that's probably one of the really important things that we've done in the last couple of years to ensure that our curriculum is cutting edge. And as we've listened to today, how do we respond to COVID and the fact that our future jobs are going to be very different possibly to what they were in the past, and hopefully by having the employer engagement throughout our curriculum and informing our curriculum, we're able to respond to that in the future. So Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Track. So I think we are almost running out of our time. So if you have any further inquiries and if you want to know more about the institution participating today and about the topic as well, so please feel free to contact the university reps directly. So you can find this information in the chat box, so you can copy and paste to your note. So thank you so much for all these speakers today. It's been very insightful and very useful sessions. So I deeply appreciate all the guest speakers and even university reps helping to answer the questions at the backstage and for your wonderful insights and support. So to attendees, why don't we send them a thank you message in the chat box? If you find this session useful or inspiring, then please send a message. So we are going to do another webinar series for postgraduate level in March next year. So we will keep you posted. Make sure to follow us on Kakao Talk. And our team has randomly picked a person for our present. So to the winner, please check your question box. It is say 내 질문 or my questions. So please check your question box. If you are replied by our colleague, then that means you win the prize. So please follow up with the information we provided. So that will be end of our presentation. And everyone, once again, thank you so much for joining our 4th session today. In 10 minutes, the 5th session will begin. So please feel free to join if you're interested in hearing the current students, the current Korean student at the UK University, at Oxford University. If not, stay tuned for the upcoming events and the latest news for Study UK at Kakao Talk. Thank you all for joining today. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. And stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.